Some secrets, you see, don't stay buried. They fester. They linger in the quiet places like the tall pines of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And sometimes, they scream out from the past, demanding to be heard. This is one of those secrets. It's a story that begins on a seemingly ordinary spring evening, but ends in a mystery so dark, so tangled, that even decades later, it refuses to give up its dead. It's a tale that challenges everything we think we know about safety, about community, and about the terrifying reality that evil can find you, even in the most peaceful of places. A place you might call home. The place was Keddie, California. A once bustling railroad town, by 1981 it had become a sleepy, rustic resort deep in the mountains of Plumas County. It was the kind of place people went to escape. For the Sharp family, it was meant to be a new beginning. Glenna Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old single mother, had recently left an abusive relationship and moved her 5 children into cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort. It was a modest, wood-paneled cabin, a refuge from a troubled past. She was there with her 15-year-old son, John, her 14-year-old daughter, Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, and her 2 youngest boys, Rick and Greg, along with their friend, Justin. The night was April 11th, 1981, a Saturday. The air was likely still crisp with the mountain chill. John and his friend, a 17-year-old named Dana Wingate, had plans to go to a party in the nearby town of Quincy. They were seen hitchhiking earlier that day, 2 teenagers on the cusp of a spring evening, full of life and unaware of the darkness that was gathering. Sue Sharp was home with her younger children and Sheila. Sheila had a friend over. Sometime that evening, she left to spend the night at a neighbor's cabin, a simple decision that would ultimately spare her life. The 2 youngest boys, Rick and Greg, along with their friend Justin, were settled in a separate bedroom, ready for sleep. Everything seemed normal, the kind of normal that precedes a storm. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled screams around 1:30 a.m., but dismissed them as the sounds of a couple fighting, a common occurrence in the thin-walled cabins of the resort. No one called the police. No one checked. The sounds faded back into the silence of the forest, swallowed by the immense, indifferent darkness of the mountains. The residents of Keddie Resort slept on, oblivious to the fact that in cabin 28, a nightmare was unfolding, one that would etch itself into the very soul of their small community forever. Morning came, as it always does. The sun rose on Sunday, April 12th, casting its light over the quiet cabins, the whispering pines. But for Sheila Sharp, returning home around 7:45 a.m. from her friend's cabin, the morning brought not warmth, but an icy, creeping dread. The front door was unlocked, a strange and unsettling detail. She pushed it open and stepped inside, calling out for her mother, for her brothers. The silence that answered was heavy, unnatural. The air itself felt wrong, thick with a metallic scent she couldn't place. It was the smell of something terrible. She walked from the living room into the cold, still heart of the cabin. And there, she saw it. A scene of such unimaginable violence that it would be forever seared into her memory. Her mother, Sue, her brother John, and his friend, Dana Wingate. They were on the floor, bound tightly with electrical wire and medical tape. The scene was chaotic, brutal. A yellow blanket was draped over them, a futile attempt to cover the horror. But nothing could cover it. Sheila, a child of just 14, stood frozen for a moment that must have felt like an eternity, trying to process a sight that no one should ever have to see. Instinct took over. She turned and ran. She fled the cabin, her screams finally breaking the morning's eerie peace, alerting a neighbor who then called the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. Sheila's 2 younger brothers, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin, were found physically unharmed in their bedroom. They had slept through the entire ordeal, a fact that has baffled investigators for years. How could 3 young boys sleep through a symphony of such savage violence happening just 1 room away? It was the first of many questions in a case that would soon be overflowing with them. The youngest daughter, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, was nowhere to be found. She wasn't in the cabin. She wasn't at a friend's house. She had simply vanished. Her coat and shoes were still in the cabin, suggesting she hadn't left willingly. The horrific triple homicide now had a terrifying new dimension, a kidnapping. Tina was missing, taken from a scene of absolute carnage. The search for her began immediately, a desperate race against time, while investigators tried to piece together the bloody puzzle left behind in Cabin 28, a puzzle that seemed to have no logical solution. When law enforcement arrived, they stepped into a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. The living room of Cabin 28 was not just a crime scene, it was a testament to rage. The victims, Sue, John, and Dana, had been subjected to a ferocious attack. Autopsies would later reveal they had been bludgeoned with at least 2 different hammers and stabbed repeatedly with a steak knife that was found at the scene, its blade bent from the force of the attack. The initial investigation, however, was plagued by missteps. The scene was chaotically processed, with some accounts describing it as being handled with the inexperience of a small-town department suddenly faced with a complex major homicide. One fingerprint was lifted from a handrail on the back porch, but it was never matched to anyone in any database. But the sheer number of people traipsing through the cabin in the early hours, neighbors, first responders, officials, created a risk of contamination that would haunt the case for years to come. One of the most bizarre pieces of evidence was a statement from the youngest boys. Justin, the friend staying over, told investigators he had a dream about the murders. In this dream, he saw Sue arguing with a man who had a mustache. He saw John and Dana arrive and join the argument. Then he saw 2 men attacking them with hammers. The details were chillingly specific. Was it a dream? Or was it the fragmented memory of a terrified child peeking from the bedroom door, witnessing an event so traumatic that his mind could only process it as a nightmare? Almost immediately, suspicion fell on 2 men who lived just a few cabins away from the Sharps, Martin Smart and his friend, John Beau Boubed. Martin was a neighbor and a veteran, and his wife Marilyn had reportedly befriended Sue Sharp, even warning her that Martin was a violent man. On the night of the murders, Martin and Beau had been at a local bar. Martin later told police that a hammer, remarkably similar to one believed to be a murder weapon, had mysteriously gone missing from his home around that time. It was a detail too specific to ignore. The boys' dream also seemed to point toward these men. The description of one of the attackers closely matched Martin Smart, and Beau Boubed, a man with a supposed background in organized crime from Chicago, was an intimidating figure who fit the profile of the second attacker. The theory was that Martin, possibly enraged by Sue's attempts to counsel his wife to leave him, went to Cabin 28 to confront her. Beau went with him. When John and Dana walked in on the confrontation, the situation exploded into uncontrollable violence. For 3 long years, the question of what happened to Tina Sharp remained unanswered. Her missing person poster became a fixture, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the case's lingering trauma. Then, in 1984, the answer finally came, and it was as grim as everyone had feared. An anonymous phone call directed law enforcement to a remote area near Feather Falls, about 30 miles from Keddie. There, investigators discovered a partial human skull and several other bones. Dental records confirmed the unthinkable. The remains belonged to Tina Sharp. She had been murdered, just like her mother and brother. The mystery of her whereabouts was solved, but the mystery of who was responsible only deepened. The case went cold, officially cold. For decades, the files gathered dust. The whispers in Keddie faded to murmurs. Cabin 28, a place of such profound horror, was eventually demolished in 2004, as if erasing the structure could erase the memory of what happened within its walls. But you can't demolish a memory. In 2013, the case was officially reopened, spurred on by new detectives and advances in forensic technology. They re-examined the old evidence with fresh eyes, hoping that science could finally provide the answers that shoe leather police work could not. And they found something. A key piece of evidence that had been overlooked for more than 30 years. Shortly after the case was reopened, a hammer matching the description of the one Martin Smart claimed to have lost was discovered in a local pond. Furthermore, a therapist who had counseled Martin years after the murders came forward, stating that Martin had confessed to him that he had killed Sue Sharp, though he denied killing the children. This confession, however, was made in a therapy session and was not enough to posthumously close the case. Martin Smart had died in 2000, never facing justice. So where does that leave us? Today is September 15th, 2025. More than 4 decades have passed since that terrible night in Cabin 28. The case officially remains open. The primary suspects are long dead. DNA evidence from the scene has been linked to living people, but investigators have not yet named them publicly, leaving a tantalizing and frustrating thread of hope dangling. The full truth of what happened in that small cabin in the woods, who was involved and why, is still locked away. The suspect or suspects were never formally charged, never brought to justice, and for the families of the victims, the haunting continues.